Marc Durand lowered the camera for 3 seconds. When he looked up again, his daughter had disappeared. Paris, June 15, 1984, 3:42 p.m. Champ de Mars, under the Eiffel Tower. Marc didn't notice immediately. He was changing the film roll, concentrated on that delicate mechanism of the Nikon camera he had received for Christmas. 3 seconds of distraction. 3 seconds that would change everything. "Marc, where is Camille?" Elodie's voice cut through the air. He looked up. The red balloon his daughter was holding was floating alone, stuck in a tree branch. The white lace dress, the red hair, the pearl necklace, everything was gone. Camille was 6 years old and had been there less than a minute ago. Now she was no longer there. What followed was pure panic. Elodie screamed her daughter's name. Once, 10 times, 100 times. Tourists stopped, forming a confused circle around the bee. Couple. Marc ran through the people, grabbing strangers, asking, "Did you see a girl, redhead, 6 years old?" No one had seen anything useful. Thousands of eyes under the city of light, and none had captured the exact moment Camille Durand ceased to exist. The police arrived in 17 minutes. Among them, Inspector Jean Moreau, 32 years old, one of the youngest in the criminal brigade. Moreau had that look, attentive, almost obsessive, that made witnesses remember details they thought they had forgotten. He began immediately. "Tell me exactly what happened. Every second matters." But the seconds had already turned into minutes, and minutes in cases of missing children are eternities. Moreau ordered the blockade of all park exits. Sniffer dogs arrived, following trails that ended nowhere. Helicopters flew over the Seine River. Camille's description: long red hair, white dress, pearl necklace 1.10 feet tall, was transmitted to all police stations and border posts. All of Paris was looking for that girl, and Paris apparently could not find her. When night fell and the Eiffel Tower lit up in gold, the Durand family was still there, refusing to leave, as if their presence could reverse the impossible. Elodie held the red balloon as if it were her daughter herself. Marc couldn't stop looking at his own hands, the hands that held the camera, the hands that failed to protect. Moreau watched the shattered couple and felt something he had never felt before: the real possibility of failure. He had joined the police with ideals of justice, believing that every mystery had a solution. But there, that night, he began to understand that the truth doesn't always win. In the following days, the case exploded. "Girl disappears under the Eiffel Tower" dominated the headlines. Posters with Camille's face were pasted on every corner of Paris. The tip line didn't stop ringing. But the more calls arrived, the more Moreau realized something terrifying. No one had really seen anything concrete. They were vague memories, impressions, assumptions. How does someone simply disappear surrounded by thousands of people? The answer, Moreau would discover much later, was hidden in a photograph he didn't even know existed yet. A child disappears in broad daylight in the most watched place in Paris. And what the police find in the first few days only makes the mystery even more impossible to solve. Subscribe now to discover the clue that seemed promising, but led the investigation into a dead-end maze. Hit the notification bell, because you won't want to lose the moment when everything starts to fall apart. 5 days after the disappearance, an Italian tourist entered the police station with an envelope of photographs. Inside was an image that would change everything. But no one knew it yet. Giuseppe Martelli, 52, from Milan, was staying in Paris when he read about Camille Durand in the newspapers. Something clicked in his memory. He had taken photos at the Champ de Mars that same afternoon of June 15th, and in one of them, in the background, out of focus but visible, was a red-headed girl near a man in a dark cap. Jean Moreau felt his heart race when he saw the photo. Was it her? It had to be. The image was sent for technical analysis. Immediately. For hours, experts tried to improve the quality, but 1984 technology had brutal limits. The photo was too grainy. The man's face was turned away. The child was partially covered by other people. Marc and Elodie were called to view it. Elodie looked at the image for long seconds. Tears are streaming down. "It could be," she whispered. "Or it could be any other red-headed girl in Paris." This uncertainty, this torture of almost having something but having nothing, became the routine of the investigation. Moreau had compiled 127 witness statements, but each person told a different version. A flower seller swore she saw a red-headed girl entering a white van at 3:50 p.m. An elderly couple claimed to have seen the same child being led by a blonde woman toward the metro at 3:45 p.m. An American student said he noticed a suspicious man watching children near the carousel at 4:10 p.m. When Moreau tried to cross-reference the testimonies, he found chaos, impossible times, conflicting physical descriptions, opposite directions. It was as if each witness had seen a different crime. A composite sketch was drawn up. Man between 35 and 45 years old, brown hair, 1.75 million sunglasses, cap, glasses, a description that applied to at least 50,000 men in Paris that afternoon. Even so, Moreau followed every lead as if it were the only one. He had to follow. He had promised the Durands he wouldn't rest. 6 months passed in a brutal cycle of hopes and disappointments. Every apartment searched ended up empty. Every suspect interrogated had a solid alibi. Every security footage reviewed showed nothing conclusive. Moreau's team, initially with 12 investigators, was reduced to 5, then 3, then just him and an assistant. Other crimes demanded attention. Resources were limited. Life moved on, for everyone except the Durand family. Elodie abandoned the Philharmonic Orchestra. How to play the violin when her daughter was missing. Mark took leave from school. How to teach literature when he couldn't read a sentence without losing focus. The marriage began to crack. Guilt is a poison that corrodes everything. On the first anniversary of the disappearance, June 15, 1985, hundreds of people lit candles at the Champ de Mars. Moreau was present, watching Elodie collapse in the arms of strangers. He had promised he would find Camille, but for the first time, he began to doubt he could keep that promise. The Italian photograph was filed in a folder marked "Inconclusive Evidence." Moreau looked at that blurry image with a frustration that hurt physically. He knew, he was absolutely sure, that there was an answer there, but he simply didn't have the tools to extract it. The photo was stored in a box, forgotten, waiting for a future where technology could reveal its secrets. What Moreau didn't know is that that photo wasn't the only one. Somewhere, another photograph, sharper, more revealing, was stored in a shoebox, and it would take 12 years for someone to find it. When even the best clue turns into a dead end, what remains for a family besides despair? Subscribe to see how Camille's case goes from active investigation to cold case, and how the investigator himself begins to crumble along with the hope. The next block will show you the darkest side of an unsolved case. Don't miss it. November 1989, 5 years later. Inspector Jean Moreau held the Camille Durand file for the last time and received the official order. Archive the case, it's time to move on. But how do you archive a broken promise? Camille's room was exactly as she left it on the morning of June 15, 1984. Princess sheets, organized toys, the small violin Elodie had bought to teach her daughter. Elodie entered that room every day and talked to the absence. She told about her day, about the changing seasons, about how Paris kept turning while their time had stopped. Mark did the opposite. He packed all of Camille's photographs, stored the clothes in boxes in the attic, removed every visual trace, not for lack of love, but because every memory was a knife. He went back to teaching, but he was a shadow. His students described him as a ghost giving classes. The marriage was dying. Elodie blamed Mark for the 3 seconds. Mark blamed himself, but also resented Elodie for turning the house into a shrine. They slept in separate rooms, ate at different times, lived like strangers sharing the same trauma. At the police station, Moreau was transferred to financial crimes, corporate fraud, endless paperwork, a job that didn't require believing in justice. But Camille's file went home with him, officially archived, unofficially kept in a drawer of his personal desk, taken out occasionally in sleepless dawns when the weight of guilt wouldn't let him sleep. The Italian photograph was still there, attached with a paperclip. blurry, frustrating, useless. But Moreau couldn't get rid of it. Something in that image called to him, like a whisper he couldn't completely hear. Paris had forgotten Camille Durand. New crimes occupied the headlines. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 dominated the news. Life went on, as it always does, indifferent to the individual tragedies left behind. Elodie developed a ritual that terrified Marc. Every afternoon, she went to the Champ de Mars and stood in the exact spot where Camille disappeared. She stayed there for hours, watching happy families, children running. When she saw a red-headed girl, she ran, caught up, looked at the face, realized once again that it wasn't Camille. Parents pulled their children away from that woman with sunken eyes and a crazed expression. Marc began considering divorce. He wanted to try to move on, maybe adopt another child, rebuild. But for Elodie, that would be betrayal. Camille was alive somewhere. She had to be. Giving up would be killing her again. In 1991, 7 years later, something in Elodie broke permanently. Marc found her in the bathroom, wrists cut, a photo of Camille pressed against her chest. "I just want to be with her," Elodie murmured as paramedics took her away. "Wherever she is, I need to be there too." Moreau visited Elodie in the psychiatric hospital. She was sedated, looking at the ceiling with empty eyes. He sat beside the bed and, for the first time since the case began, cried. Cried for the girl he couldn't find, for the parents he had failed, for his own powerlessness. When he left, he went straight to a bar, thought about burning Camille's file, finally freeing himself. But he couldn't. That case defined him. It was his deepest scar, his most painful defeat, but also his reason to continue being a policeman. Because if he gave up on Camille, he would be admitting that some injustices are never corrected. The 1980s came to an end, and with them, hope. Camille Durand was now just another name. On an endless list of the missing, a cold case, a yellowed photograph, a destroyed family. What no one knew, neither Moreau nor Elodie nor Marc, is that the answer was kept in a shoebox in a second-hand bookstore in London, and that only 5 years remained until someone found it. When everything is lost, and even the most dedicated investigator needs to accept defeat, the impossible is about to happen. Subscribe now, because in the next block, you will discover how a box bought for $5 in a London thrift store completely changed a case archived 12 years ago. The twist no one expected is coming. Hit the bell. London, March 1996. Thomas Pemberton paid $5 for a box of old photographs. Inside, it was the key to solving the biggest Paris mystery of the last 12 years. Thomas, 24, an art history student, collected old photographs, not famous works of art, just forgotten snapshots, frozen moments of anonymous lives. On that rainy Saturday in a chaotic thrift store in Notting Hill, he found a box marked Holiday Photos, 1980s. Inside were 200 loose photos: Tower of Pisa, Colosseum, Italian beaches, and then, near the bottom, a sequence of Paris. One photo, in particular, made Thomas stop. It was the Eiffel Tower seen from the Champ de Mars. Reasonable quality, but what captured his attention was a detail in the lower left corner: a girl with red hair, light dress, pearl necklace, turned in profile, and next to her, the reflection in a shop window showed a man of approximately 40 years old, with a visible scar on his forehead, wearing a badge hanging around his neck. The badge had a partially legible logo. Thomas had no reason to find that suspicious, but there was something in the body language that bothered him. The girl seemed tense. The man had a focused expression, almost predatory. Or maybe Thomas was imagining things. On impulse, he scanned the photo and posted it on a French photographic history forum called Mémoires en Images. Simple caption: Paris, Champ de Mars, probably summer of 1984. Does anyone recognize anything interesting? The photo stayed on the forum for 2 weeks without much attention, until on March 24, 1996, a user named Sophie Petit left a comment that would change everything. Mon Dieu, this child looks like that girl who disappeared in Paris in the 80s. Camille something, it was a huge case, huge. Sophie, a 45-year-old librarian in Lyon, remembered perfectly. As a mother of a daughter the same age as Camille at the time, she had been deeply affected by the disappearance. She went to an old drawer, took a faded newspaper clipping, and compared it with the image on the computer screen. Her heart raced. The resemblance was undeniable. With trembling hands, Sophie called the Paris police. Initially, she was treated with skepticism. The police received dozens of leads about old cases every month. But Sophie was persistent. She had the scanned image, she had coordinates, she had proof. The officer who answered knew Jean Moreau. Now 44 years old, 6 months away from retirement, Moreau was counting the days to finally hang up his badge and try to forget the broken promises. When the phone rang that afternoon of March 26th, he answered expecting just another bureaucratic query. "Jean, it's Dubois from Archives. There's something you need to see. It's about the Durand case, that girl from 1984. Moreau felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Camille Durand, the name that had never left him. "What do you have?" "A photo, a good photo, with details we never had. You need to—" "Come see this now." Moreau literally ran through the corridors. In the archive room there was a crowd around a monitor. On the screen, magnified, was the photograph scanned by Thomas Pemberton. And there, for the first time in 12 years, Moreau felt hope reignite. The image was clear enough to confirm that was almost certainly Camille Durand. But more importantly, there was the reflection in the window, the man with the scar, and especially the badge. Moreau asked for a high-resolution print. With a magnifying glass, he studied the logo, partially obscured, but with visible letters. Compa, Paris, Tran. He took Camille's original dossier and began to leaf through. Page 47. A statement from a janitor who mentioned seeing men with badges near the park that afternoon. At the time, the lead had gone nowhere. But now he had something concrete. Moreau spent 48 hours with practically no sleep, researching company records. Finally, he found it. Compagnie Parisienne de Transport et Logistique, a moving company that operated from 1978 to 1988. He gained access to archived records. Dozens of employees wore similar badges. But he had one more detail. The scar on the forehead. Using employee records, Moreau began tracking every person who worked for that company in 1984. 3 days later, he had a name. Bernard Lacroix, 58 years old, driver from 1981 to 1986. And in the occupational health records, a note about a work accident in 1983 that resulted in a scar on the forehead requiring 8 stitches. Moreau felt his blood pulse. He checked where Lacroix lived in 1984, Paris, and now Beauvais, 80 kilometers to the north. But there was something else, something that made Moreau almost drop his coffee. In the change of address records from July 1985, a month after Camille's disappearance, Lacroix had suddenly moved to Beauvais, and the request mentioned that he now lived with une nièce, a niece who had never been mentioned in any previous record, a niece who suddenly appeared right after Camille Durand disappeared. Moreau closed his eyes and took a deep breath. 12 years. Finally, he had something more than suspicions. He had a name, an address, a direct line connecting a man to a photograph taken at the exact moment of the disappearance. He made 2 calls. First, prosecutor, requesting a warrant. Second, Elodie Durand, who after years of psychiatric treatment had achieved some fragile stability. "Elodie," he said, voice shaking, "I have something. After all these years, I finally have something. A photograph forgotten for 12 years in a shoebox has just given a name and an address to the investigator. Subscribe now, because in the next block Jean Moreau will knock on Bernard Lacroix's door, and what he finds there will change everything. The confrontation you've waited for is in the next episode. Hit the bell, because you won't want to miss this. Beauvais, April 2, 1996, 6:47 a.m. Jean Moreau knocked 3 times on Bernard Lacroix's door. When the door opened, he saw the scar on the man's forehead and knew 12 years of searching were about to end. The house was modest, garden unkempt, paint peeling. Moreau had been in an unmarked car since 5:30 a.m., studying the residence, waiting for the support team. Beside him, the magnified photograph, that image that remained hidden for so long and was now the key to everything. 3 discreet patrol cars arrived, no sirens, no spectacle. If Lacroix was hiding something, and Moreau was sure of it, he didn't want to give a chance to destroy evidence or flee. Bernard. Lacroix, 58 years old. Grey hair, prominent belly, faded robe. And there, even after 12 years, Moreau recognized the face. The scar was clearly visible, faded by time. Bernard Lacroix. Inspector Jean Moreau, Paris Police. I have a warrant to search this residence. The color drained from Lacroix's face. His eyes moved quickly, looking for an escape route. What is this about? I didn't do anything. June 15, 1984, Champ de Mars, Paris. Were you there, Monsieur Lacroix? The denial came too fast. No, I don't know what you're talking about. Moreau pulled out the magnified photograph. This is a photo taken that day, at that location, and this man here wearing a badge from the Compagnie Parisienne de Transport et Logistique with a scar on his forehead. Monsieur Lacroix, this is you. The silence that followed was broken only by birds singing. Lacroix looked at the photograph. Something broke in his eyes. Not anger, resignation, the look of someone who knows the game is over. I want a lawyer. You will have one. But first, let's go inside. The search began methodically. Officers spread through the house. Moreau went straight to what looked like an office. In a locked drawer that had to be forced, he found a folder marked M, inside identity documents, all fake. Birth certificate for Marie Lacroix, born in 1978, 6 years older than she really would be, forged adoption certificate, and photographs of a girl. Moreau's heart almost stopped. It was Camille, older, hair cut short, dyed brown, but unmistakably Camille Durand. There were photos of her at 7 years old, at 9, at 12, at 15, growing up, living in that house with that man. "Search the basement," Moreau shouted. "Search everywhere." But even while giving orders, he knew they wouldn't find a body. Those photographs showed a child who had grown up, who had been kept alive. The terrifying question was, alive in what conditions? And more importantly, where was she now? Moreau grabbed Lacroix. "Where is she? Where is Camille?" Lacroix was crying. "Marie. Her name is Marie. She was my niece. She was 6 years old when you kidnapped her. Where is she?" "She left." Lacroix could barely speak between sobs. "In 1994, when she turned 16, I gave money. She took a train, said she never wanted to see me again." Moreau felt the world spin. Camille was alive. Or at least she was in 1994. But where? How to find her? She would be 18 now. Could be anywhere. And worse, she probably wouldn't even know her real name was Camille Durand. In the following days, Lacroix remained detained. Moreau reconstructed the story through interrogations and forensic evidence. The narrative was even more disturbing than imagined. June 15, 1984. Lacroix was working on a move near the Champ de Mars. During the break, he saw Camille alone for a moment. Something in him took control. He approached, offered candy, said he knew her parents. Camille, trained to be polite, followed him for meters. He pulled her into the moving van, all in less than a minute. He drove to his apartment in Paris, kept Camille locked up for weeks while the searches happened, cut and dyed her hair, bought different clothes. When he moved to Beauvais in July 1985, he registered her as a sole niece, daughter of a fictitious sister who had died. Camille, forced to answer to Marie, lived in that house for 10 years, isolated, no friends, homeschooled to avoid questions. Lacroix claimed never to have physically hurt her, although Moreau knew the kidnapping itself was irreparable damage. But it had been complete psychological imprisonment, a child robbed of identity, family, life. At 16, Camille, found courage. One night while Lacroix slept, she took money from a coffee tin, packed a backpack with her few possessions, and disappeared. Lacroix didn't try to look for her because he knew he would have to explain who she really was. Now came the hardest part, finding Camille. Moreau used a photo of her at 15 and aging software to project how she would look at 18. He tracked train stations, but security tapes had already been recycled. Finally, through social assistance records, he found a lead. A young Marie Lacroix had applied for benefits in Lille in March 1995. Address: Youth Hostel for the Homeless. Moreau went personally. At the hostel, the manager vaguely remembered a quiet, scared young woman who had stayed there for months before, getting a job at a bakery. He had an address. Moreau went there, heart beating so fast he thought he'd have a heart attack. And there, behind the counter, wearing an apron covered in flour, was an 18-year-old young woman. Short brown hair, green eyes, facial features unmistakably belonging to Elodie and Marc Durand. Marie Lacroix? Moreau asked gently. The young woman looked with suspicion and fear, the expression of someone who learned not to trust. Who wants to know? My name is Jean Moreau. I'm a Paris police officer, and I have something very important to tell you about who you really are. 12 years of searching. A forgotten photograph. Technology that finally revealed the truth. But how do you explain to someone that their whole life was a lie? Subscribe now to see the most emotional meeting of this story, when Camille finally reunites with the family that never stopped looking for her. The final episode will make you believe that justice, even if delayed, is still possible. Hit the bell. Lille, back room of a bakery. Jean Moreau was sitting across from the young woman he had searched for 12 years, and now he needed to find the right words to destroy and rebuild her life at the same time. Marie, he began gently, when you were born on March 4th, 1978, it wasn't in Amiens as your documents say. You were born in Paris, and your name isn't Marie Lacroix. Your name is Camille Durand. The young woman stood completely still. Moreau continued, taking the original photograph from the envelope, the one taken at the Champ de Mars in 1984. He pointed to the 6-year-old red-headed girl. This is you, with your parents on this day, Elodie and Marc Durand. They are your real parents. No. The voice was a whisper. That doesn't... Mr. Lacroix said my mother had died. That Bernard Lacroix isn't your uncle. He is the man who kidnapped you that day. He kept you for 10 years. But Camille, your real parents, your true parents, never stopped looking for you. They never gave up, not for a single day. Camille's hands trembled. She looked at the photograph, at that red-headed girl with the pearl necklace. Memories began to surface, fragmented, distorted by time and trauma. A red balloon, a golden tower, a woman's voice calling her name. Not Marie, another name, a name she couldn't fully remember, but that echoed somewhere deep in her mind. Do they still, Madame? Are they still alive? Her voice was barely audible. Yes. Your mother, Elodie, lives in Paris. Your father, Marc, too. They divorced years ago, but both never stopped waiting for this moment. Camille, they want to see you very much. But only if you want to. I won't force anything. You've been through immense trauma. We'll go at your pace. It took 3 days for Camille to process. 3 days of conversations with psychologists specializing in trauma, social workers, and Moreau, who remained in Lille throughout the process. He had waited 12 years. He could wait a few more days to do this the right way. Camille asked to see more photographs. Moreau brought entire albums Elodie had kept, photos of baby Camille, on her first birthday, her second, her third. Each image was a piece of stolen identity returning. Little by little, through the photographs, Camille began to remember. The house in Paris, her mother's violin, her father's books, the cat they had. Memories buried by a decade of lies began to resurface. I want to see them, she finally said, but I'm scared. They are scared too, Moreau answered honestly. Scared that you won't recognize them. Scared that you won't forgive them for losing sight of you in those 3 seconds. But above all, they just want you to know that they never stopped loving you. The reunion was organized in a neutral environment, a private room in a victim support center in Paris. April 18, 1996, 12 years minus 3 years minus. Days since the disappearance. Elodie arrived first, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold her purse. Mark arrived 15 minutes later, hair completely grey now, eyes red from sleepless nights. When Camille entered the room, time stopped. Elodie covered her mouth with her hands, tears already flowing. Mark stood frozen, as if moving could make that vision disappear. Camille looked at those two people, strangers who were her parents, and something inside her broke and reassembled simultaneously. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Elodie took a step forward slowly. "You don't need to say anything, my love. You just need to know that never, not for a second, did we stop loving you. That every day without you was an incomplete day. That you were sought, wanted, loved every day of those 12 years. Camille began to cry. And then, as if some ancient and deep memory took control, she ran into Elodie's arms. Mark joined the embrace. And there in that room, a shattered family began the long and painful process of reassembling itself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't like in the movies. Camille had years of trauma to process. There was mistrust. There was anger. There was grief for a stolen childhood. Therapy became a permanent part of their lives. But for the first time in 12 years, there was real hope for healing. Bernard Lacroix was tried and sentenced to 25 years in prison for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and forgery of documents. During the trial, Camille gave her testimony, not as a broken victim, but as a survivor. "He stole my childhood," she said, looking directly at Lacroix. "But he won't steal my future. I have a family that loves me, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life getting to know who I really am." Moreau was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. He looked at Elodie and Mark sitting next to Camille and felt something he hadn't felt in 12 years, the feeling that he had kept his promise. Belatedly, imperfectly, but kept. After the trial, something unexpected happened. Thomas Pemberton, the English student who had bought that box of photographs, was contacted by Moreau. "You saved a life," Moreau told him. "That photo you posted on a forum out of curiosity. It brought a girl back to her family." Inspired by the story, Thomas created a project called Forgotten Photos Found Memories, an online platform where people could send old photographs they had of public places. The idea was to create a visual archive that could aid in missing persons investigations. Dozens of old cases were revisited. Some clues were found. Some families finally got answers. Camille Durand, she decided to keep her birth name, slowly rebuilt her identity. She learned she loved music like her mother, that she had a way with words like her father, that she was stronger than any trauma. At 20, she gave her first public interview, not to tell sordid details, but to send a message. To all, families with missing loved ones, never stop looking. And to all victims, it is possible to survive and build a life beyond trauma. Jean Moreau retired in October 1996, 6 months after solving the case that defined him. At his farewell party, Camille attended with Elodie and Mark. She handed Moreau a gift, the original photograph of the Champ de Mars, framed with an inscription, "To the man who never gave up. Thank you for bringing me home." Years later, when asked about the Camille Durand case, Moreau always said the same thing. Justice has no expiration date. Sometimes it takes 12 years. Sometimes it takes a lifetime. But as long as there is someone looking, as long as there is someone who cares, the truth always has a chance to win. And that photograph, forgotten in a shoebox, it remains to this day in the Paris Police Museum, with a plaque that reads, "The photo that solved a decade-old cold case, proof that sometimes the smallest details change everything." Camille Durand's story reminds us that technology evolves, investigative methods improve, and that a single image can contain truths that take years to be revealed. But above all, it reminds us that love, the love of a family that never gave up, of an investigator who carried the guilt for 12 years, of strangers who helped without knowing, this love can cross a decade of darkness and still bring someone back home. This was the true story of how a photo forgotten for 12 years brought justice. And a family back. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more true crime cases where justice, even if delayed, finally wins. Leave in the comments. Do you believe that cold cases should be reopened when new evidence emerges? And share this video so that more people know the incredible story of Camille Durand. See you in the next case.